Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe. Also, I would like to thank Rob for finding the med stories.
Hi X/. I have served as a member of a NATO task force in Kosovo for the last 3 years. I fear that with things heating up in Israel, I and my comrades will be called upon. So now it is time that I share my stories. In 2010, when I first started in Kosovo, I met a Polish man named Josef who was very old. He never told us his true age, but he had been in Bosnia in the early 90s and in Iraq in 2003. This guy had seen a lot and looked like it. One day at camp he told us of a time where he and his detail had been sent up into some hills in about 1993 to search for a small mortar that was firing on the village below. He and his small convoy made it to the end of a mountain road and had to continue on foot. Villagers about kept away from this mountain and the woods around it. Old Josef and his men did find the mortar pit. They were surprised to find that the Serbs manning the mortar had plenty of ammunition, food, and water, as well as a small dugout and hideaway. They may have been able to take Josef and his men if they had been alive. What they found was a small grave with about 10 bodies thrown in. The women in there were naked. Josef and his men investigated and found that after digging and throwing the bodies in the grave, one of the men opened fire on his comrades, killing them all about. He then appears to have shot himself in his head and fell into the grave. And Josef swears to the fact that this man who turned on his men and shot himself was lying locked in embrace with one of the dead women. In the winter of 2011, I was manning a guard post at a tiny airfield close to the Montenegro border. There were woods all around, and it was me, my radio, my firearm, and a window to these dark woods. Floodlights lit up the edge of this place, but still the glare from these windows was hindering. The worst thing was this terrible downpour of snow. This airfield was tiny and held a single tiny prop airplane. Opposite the airfield was an identical box where another poor soul named Tarovitz enjoyed the same grueling job as I. We chatted on the radio about stupid things. Girls we would enjoy sex with, drugs we enjoyed, the situation with the Bosnians, politics, etc. All of a sudden Tarovitz yelps and starts freaking out, saying he is sighting unidentified personnel on the edge of the tree line. He says there are 4 and that they are closing. He opens a little slot and begins yelling at them. Also, the creepy things is about 30 meters away in the tree line is a sturdy chain link fence which rattles a lot when jumped. He tells them to halt or he will use force and that they need to identify themselves. I grab my rifle and run out towards Tarovitz's post. As I am running, I hear a gunshot. Then another, then another, then another. I get to his cabin and he has the window opened and is scared to all hell. I look to try to see any of these contacts. I see one figure as it looks at me and turns its head in a weird kind of curiosity. That really rattled me, and just thinking about it freaks me out today. I see the thing wave and then I can make it out no longer thanks to the snow and darkness. I stay with Tarovitz as an officer comes in wondering what happened. A bunch of people show up to secure the perimeter, and in the morning 2 of the 4 bullets are recovered. No tracks are found, and no breaches are in the fence. After an eternity of paperwork, Tarovitz is taken off the guard roster, lucky bastard, because the next night things get worse. So, I am assigned to his cabin and a man named Jerton is assigned to my old cabin. We talk of much of the same things, only this time we are both on edge. Jerton was young, and especially superstitious and jumpy. I think we both kind of wanted something creepy and sinister to be happening just out of boredom. As we are talking about fucking some actress, I see a shape out of the corner of my eye go past the window to my left, the door being at my back. This is not good. I tell Jerton what has happened, and he tells me to stay calm and he would take a look. We assigned a call and response, lion starfish. So, I sat tight, not making much out except the terrified reflection of my own face in the glass. I don't know how much time passed, but I put it to about an hour of radio silence with Jerton. I got pissed and tried to convert that anger to courage. I was going to jump out and secure my surroundings, not be toyed with in this tiny box. And so, I waited, my mouth dry. I released the lock and jumped out, my rifle trained. No Jerton was to be seen. But what I did see was a bunch of figures retreating to the woods quickly. I went to see Jerton and he was on the floor of his post, his gun up. The little nearly shot me when I entered. But I said lion, and he starfish, so luckily, I was not riddled with bullets. We stayed in there just waiting until the sun rose. And on inspection we found footprints circling both our cabins, sometimes 4 times around. That really gets me. Also, Jerton is a bitch for abandoning me. Yes. So, this next story was in 2011. And this one really freaks me out. It is the shortest and the least involved, but I hope you can understand the horror of what I saw and heard. So, the local police in a small village were having huge issues with looters from the hills, so a tiny group of us NATO types stepped in and stayed in a large, fortified, comfortable mayor's house. He was a very nice man who ate us good food and let us sleep in his beds as he slept in the attic. At about 3 am, I was awoken to go on patrol with 3 others. We walked around this tiny town and we came to this open-air market. A few merchants were setting up rugs and vegetables to sell. We saw a man in all black run to one of the stands, push down the merchant, and grab a bag of his food. He saw us and about shat himself. We were lightly armed and armored, and so, against better judgment, and NATO regulation, we chased this man. He ran, and we followed. Eventually we left the village and we saw him disappear into the side of a small hill. We scouted along this hill until we found a small cave. Up until this point we were having a good time with a good chase and I, along with a couple others, were smiling. This ended immediately. The man was pushing food into the maw of a decomposing corpse. We arrested him and were ordered to investigate his house for arms. We found that he had the corpses of some 10 people, most were his family members. Most of them were dismembered in what looked to have been explosions. We found some of these corpses to be from the early 90s. Even worse, the guy had been living there, and by the looks of it with some of the dead, feeding them and bathing them. Even worse, we find a minister's uniform. The guy had been a church minister. He denied that they were dead and was institutionalized. Very sad and left us all afraid of Kosovo. One day in 11 a woman came to us with a deep cut on her forehead. She told us how she had gone into church at midnight and the dead had tried to make her join them. We were ordered to investigate the church as kind of a formability to gain some trust from the locals. The place had a huge crater in the top where a shell had fallen. It was creepy, as you might expect a dead church to be. The one thing we did find was a knife on the altar with a bit of fresh blood. We laughed it off uneasily and continued on. I am in my mid-20s and from a country in the north of Europe. I have 3 confirmed kills and 2 unconfirmed. In my 3 years in Kosovo and those disputed territory in NATO Kosovo 4, aka KFOR, I have learned that in such rural places where superstition is king, things do happen outside what I can explain. It is humbling and makes me think a lot. Here, for my loyal listeners. A friend of mine called Jorge recently transferred from Afghanistan peacekeeping operations to Kosovo, and we exchanged stories. One of them stood out to me as especially creepy. I shall share it with you. He was on patrol on a small backwater road when he intercepted some radio chatter of foreign origin. They figured out that it was not the usual tongues of the area, and the translator they had could not identify it. Jorge explained this voice to be shrill and seemed to be many voices in complete and perfect unison. This was weird even for Afghanistan radio standards. The transmission cut out mid-sentence and none of them really talked much. The day was almost over, and so they pinned out the area where the broadcast was taking place as a small radio broadcasting building. They could not investigate it then and decided to in the morning. When they arrived, they found that the building had burned down. They asked the Afghani nationals why no one had helped them. The town had a small fire department, and they told them that it is getting burned down was for the best, as the children would stop themselves now. Puzzled, they talked to town officials, who told them that in the past month 32 youths had committed or attempted to commit. They all blame the strange broadcast. Jorge and I found it in a Nike shoebox in the gutter of a village. There was a note asking for forgiveness for the sin against God. We went to bury the corpse in the woods when a villager stopped us and insisted we give the box to him. We refused and buried the unborn. A couple days later we returned with some flowers to lay, and the grave was dug up. That is pretty fucked at. Anyway, thank you guys, I still have a few stories. Kosovo is a strange land. Can you describe the figure a bit more? Was it clearly human? I think you have cited the wrong story. I will assume you mean the figure from my experience at the airfield. The figure was simply a figure. I could only make out that he was there and moving and sentient. Even with the floodlights facing him, I couldn't make much out at all. Yeah, wrong story, sorry. So, it was human then? Not a fucking leprechaun or banshee or alien. The main premise of these stories would make some great short stories or even a novel. I'd buy it. Definitely a human in shape, but in stature and the way it carried itself. It was intelligent and calculated and lurking. It was smart, and it was just as puzzled by me as I was terrified of it. It looked at me like a cat looks at a leaf falling. Anyway, my friend Spire told me he befriended a middle-aged man called Luka earlier this year. Luka told Spire that he had once been a soldier fighting for the Serbians and that he had killed 14 Muslim Bosnians and 4 Croatians in his lifetime and lived alone in the woods for several years of his life. Spire was intrigued and the two became good friends. Spire introduced me to Luka, and we all began talking of our crazy experiences. Not much could compare to when Luka told us that he lived on the Croatians when he was young and that he became friends with spirits that roamed the woods. We told us that his dead brothers would often bring newly killed animals and information about that war. We stopped talking to Luka. So, these are the people who rule my Kosovo. Congratulations US government and England for truly putting the last nail in the coffin for Serbia. I bid you a farewell. Speaking of God, Yosef told me of AM that opened fire on his convoy in 1993. A translator told them over loudspeaker they were friendly and that only Croats and Serbs were considered hostiles. The Bosnians opened fire and killed the translator and a few of Yosef's men. The M was wedged between the slope of a mountain and a dense wood. Yosef marked the place for airstrike and told the inhabitants that they were to be targeted as enemies if they did not stand down. He told them once 3 minutes was up the M would be ash. A woman opened a window at the top holding a white flag and waving it. Just as Yosef was about to call it off, several gunshots erupted inside the M. The woman fell out of sight and a MG opened up on Yosef's position. He took his vehicles up the hill and watched as Tomcats took out the location in a fireball. He saw one small girl walk from the explosion unscathed and clean, walking through flames unshaken. Very strange. No friend, This is the worst Kosovo has to offer. I am not an American. I served with English, Germans, Finns, and men from my own beloved state. We can make a better Kosovo together if everyone puts their differences aside and stops killing. Religion and race has scared the Balkans with warfare. Those who do violence here are proving that they need the Ottoman Empire or the Austro-Hungarian Empire to own them to be civilized and not screaming zealots. It is sad how the worst of a population can bring it down so low. My heart to the peaceful Serbs, Croats, Albanians, and Bosnians. I treat Kosovo with as much respect as I would treat my homeland. The people under my command are delicate and have yet to kill an unarmed civilian or fire at a protester. Those who work for peace are kin, no matter the flag they wear. I am drinking a shitty wine now. I propose a toast to a peaceful Balkans. One little story told to me this morning by a friend named Adrian who worked a lot in Afghanistan. He said that his team was responding, with a large detail of Afghani nationals, to a dance hall that had been bombed when the owners refused to close it. Numbers were not accurate, and the constables reported thousands dead, even with the village population being something like 340. The constable was clearly not in his right mind as he started screaming about the dead being taken by demons. Adrian told the man to be calm and settle down, and asked if he was on any intoxicants. The man continued screaming in horror for about an hour, talking about the places they were taking the corpses and the things they were doing to them. Adrian showed up and showed the Afghans the proper etiquette when dealing with the situation. They went in to search for survivors and found none. They did find about 15 bodies that looked to have been holding hands in a circle around a table. After the constable that had freaked out was tested for drug use and it came back negative. Very strange. The man retired as constable and supposedly isled himself some days later. Hello again I am that guy from the NATO. You can find the last archived thread by googling spooky NATO. The past few months have been somewhat insane, and I have some new stories to share. I would be honored if you would lend your eyes to the experiences. The first thing I must tell you is that I am no longer in that strange land of Kosovo. When I left, the air was different and you could sense the place and the people lightening up and calming down. I now write to you from the Horn of Africa, where I am participating in anti-piracy operations. I spent much of my time in the Gulf here, and a little ways into the Indian Ocean. So, I have gone from the cold woods to the hot ocean. So, I begin my first story with the sighting of a rusted ship in territorial waters. This is not uncommon, as the pirates we deal with are rarely sailing in anything first-hand or not welded from scrap hulls. So, we go closer and get our gear and weapons. There are about a dozen of us on the patrol boat and about 5 of us are boarding lads. We do the usual dance, issue them warnings, tell them our intention to search them, and then advise them to prepare to be boarded. We have all our ammo stocked and we tie on. Still they have not made themselves visible, leading us to believe either this is a derelict hulk coasting along currents, abandoned, or they are hiding. As we come aboard, we find that the deck is sparse, there isn't much in the way of provisions on it. There are a couple of reels of fishing nets and some rusted poles. The ship is a couple dozen meters across, and it has a bottom hold and an above command deck. We search the hold and find several devices in the kitchen are on. The lights in the place do not work, but several flashlights and lamps still shine. There is a small gas stove and it is still warm. There are rows of dirty beds, in some cases just bare metal frames. We find a small chest under one such frames. Inside there are an assortment of dental utensils. Small saws, pliers, the whole lot. We confiscate it and move to search the surface level where we believe the bridge is. We come up the clunky stairs to find a mostly gutted control room, missing many of the metallic bits. Again, this is not unusual at all in the Gulf. So, we get back out to the deck and I ask a fellow boarder what he makes of the lights and stove. Just as I ask him, we hear a large bang from the bridge, and we rush up. Out of nowhere there is now a tall, ancient, and skinny black man panting on the ground, having jumped from a place already checked and found empty. This guy is going insane, just hitting himself against the flooring, and beating on anything he can touch. He is going ballistic, crying and wailing all the while. We restrain the poor guy and bring him out to the deck, give him water and some beans. We finally get him calmed down enough to remove the restraints from his wrists and we try to get him to tell us what happened to him and explain himself. The translator can only make out so much to what he deciphers to there were more here, but they had to go, we can't all see the end and its joy, so over the rails with them. And God dragged them down with long arms until I could see them no more. We all look at each other with serious what the fuck eyes. We restrain the guy again and he is taken back to Yemen, where he was probably transferred to a mental ward. But that freaking sentence. There were more here, but they had to go, we can't all see the end and its joy, so over the rails with them. And God dragged them down with long arms until I could see them no more. That is what gets me. Another story is when I and my guys are stationed on an oil platform that spans several levels and directions. This thing is massive, basically a large city in the middle of the ocean. Huge towers guard the sides, but with all the smoke coming from the big refineries. I was in one such towers with a friend called Powell. We were armed with basic sniper rifles, which really were nothing but a formality. Our main job was to keep watch with the trusty Mark I eyeball. The night was very late and all you have to light the far reaches is the sky, which doesn't do a whole lot. So really there is just an abrupt end to where the oil platform's lights can reach. A lot of us call this the drop-off because it looks like the world just drops off. A lot of shadows play at the end of your vision at the drop-off. We jokingly call these the sirens or mermaids. One day about the middle of our shift, a large light emits from just over the drop. This is really weird because the light should reflect on the waves and water around it, but this light just hangs in a large oval. It is this really pale light, maybe with a blue tinge to it, but it is really like this sickly white yellow. This light ball kind of floats over the drop and into view of a lot of people. We make some calls and before we finish them there are a lot of towers with their lights trained on this thing. It kind of floats around a bit, we think it may be a school of jellyfish of some sort. Later we found that there aren't significant populations of any species that can do that around these parts. This thing starts to circle the main platform, I don't see all of it, but all the towers report this thing just circling us. At once it splits itself into two smaller light balls. And to describe it better, these lights are clearly below the surface of the ocean. No water is distorting around their movement. They are just bright enough to make them hard to look at. So, the two circle around, one going further than the other so that no matter where they are in their rotation, the towers can see them. Out of nowhere the thing lifts up a bit and all the towers report something different. The people of the tower to our right report that the thing screamed, almost like a mixture of a bird and a whale. We report the same thing. The towers behind us report that the thing leapt up, and began splashing around wildly, taking on some different forms as it did. I heard the scream, and it was not pleasant. Another comes from a friend of mine called Harker. Harker had been acting as an advisor to the Ugandan army, drilling them and testing them on the basics. He took the troop on a large run, some 24 miles around the territory. Harker had arranged the route they would take, and the run would take them along a heavily forested area deep in the countryside. As he and the company came along this wood, a lot of the soldiers began getting jumpy, reporting eyes in the tree line. Harker dismissed this as superstitious banter and continued. One man began chastising Harker, his acting officer, for taking them along this path. Harker became furious and took the soldier aside to speak to him about chain of command. Now before I continue, I have seen this kind of creature on X/ before. And I was particularly intrigued by this report when I heard it. Harker told him that they were a literal chain of various lengths, some bigger and stronger than others and some weaker and smaller, but a chain all the same. And if a link fails, then it cuts off many others, the usual stereotypical pep talk. From the wood he heard a painful rendition of his speech, as if an animal struggled to mimic it. The man being punished told Harker that was exactly what he had been talking about, and that the mimics had followed them all along the jungle. The mimic continued to repeat the speech a number of times until it tuned finally to a perfect copy of Harker's voice. It was then that the voice began wailing and crying, demanding medical help. The thing is, many voices began echoing, all in Harker's voice, saying, "Come in here and help me." At least 2 other of my company were present at the time. Harker and the company, as you can imagine, took no extra time by that jungle and began sprinting away, followed for some time by cries for help and lures into the trees. A very strange story came from an ex-United States Marine who served in the 2003 invasion of Iraq. This guy was kind of a nut. He believed in chemtrails, Illuminati, all that shit. You guys would have loved him. The Marine was moving along in a convoy and came across a row of 3 deserted T-80s. This was regular as the Iraqis had been deserting their tanks in droves. So, the convoy stopped, and they got out to clear the things. They got the usual fuel and water from the first 2 tanks. Technicians got any surplus ammo to be gathered and detonated. The first 2 tanks were stripped down without incident. The third one was different. The hatch was sealed, and it took those same technicians a bit to pry open. When they did get it open, one of them vomited. We checked the inside and there were what looked like 4 boys of adolescent age, and 1 man wearing a tank officer's uniform. The boys were, all isled of a straight cut to the jugular. The tank officer had apparently died of a pistol shot to the temple. Poor fuckers. I have a buddy named Axel who served a couple tours in Afghanistan. I asked him if he saw anything out of the ordinary. His eyes lit up and he told me a couple cool happenings that he swears to his Lord are true. The first is that when on patrol his Humvee was riding along a nice shitty road in the desert wastes. The light was fading, and the road was notorious for its high amount of IEDs. Stopping out there for the night would be suicide, so their only choice would be to press through. High above, Axel saw a large flock of buzzards vultures circle above him and follow his Humvee. He pointed this out to his driver, at which the driver panicked and stopped the vehicle. Sure enough, about 30 meters from where they parked lay a pretty sizable explosive, one that could have made him, his mate, and his vehicle little bits and pieces. He was able to remove it, and as soon as they were at it again, the vultures' buzzards dissipated. According to him, this happened about 3 more times on the same drive. He now believes that the carrion-eating bird sensed that he was about to die and gathered each time. Pretty interesting stuff. My friend Jordan tells me of a time where a village complained about a bomb in a wheat field. Jordan was called along with a few others in proper gear to handle a bomb, and they asked the villagers to stay calm, keep away and shine a light or otherwise mark where the bomb was. They arrived and came to a villager who had done as asked and marked it off. The bomb was supposedly off in a close corner and was a little anti-infantry bomb. There is a creepy little scarecrow in the middle, and Jordan walks out to keep post while the bomb tech goes about his business. The tech goes says he is going to his vehicle to retrieve a tool or some rather and will be back in a second. As he walks back, Jordan talks about how tech's trip and back felt like hours and he hallucinated heavily. He explained that he was paralyzed, and everyone had left. He could not speak, and the scarecrow got down from its perch and stalked him in the wheat field for ages, watching him and following him slowly. He was awoken by the tech, who chastised him for spacing out. When he looked, the scarecrow was not on its perch. Guys, if you like what you hear, bump it. The more enjoying the stories, the more I feel like sharing them. One of my soldiers called Finch tells me on the northern edge of Kosovo in 2008 on patrol, he and his lot found 3 old bodies clogging up an abandoned village as well. 2 of these bodies were women, and in their arms were babies they had drowned. In the side of the well it was etched in the stone for Adnan, a common name of the region. The well had to be closed for quite a while, and to this day is referred to as Adnan's well. We were in a small village on a routine patrol at around 3 in the morning. All of a sudden I get a call on the radio from command to get inside ASAP. I got my people into a tavern that was open 24/7. After I explained my situation to the barkeep, he offered us drinks. We politely declined, but some of us tipped him for being such a good bartend. I looked out the window while I let my men sit around eating some bagels the man brought out for us. I checked the radio and tried to get into command. The channel is always clear and open, so I was surprised when I finally got a response for my question. Sit tight NATO Bro, keep eyes on the window, we have a situation we are dealing with. I was absolutely stumped. Never had I heard someone talk like this to me. Like I was not to be trusted. I started looking for open channels and got one of my boys, Graham, to keep watch out the window. I sat at the bar switching around until I received a local low frequency. From what I could make out from the Albanian was something along the lines of this: last night it took him and made him pay. Another word I heard, I had never heard before, and it was a name. Perhaps he is worthy of drink to the Barjanik. Perhaps, but long nights keep him fed and far from thirsty. This really weirded me out. After a couple of hours, we see a guy run out onto the street and start yelling at the top of his lungs, which upsets many animals and families. He is repeating in Albanian the words Barjanik, I am one. Take me and feed your friends. The barkeep says that the man speaks to aliens and ghosts, and he has seen him be taken by a UFO and its crew. The barkeep spoke some English but pronounced UFO like a word. One of my last ones, and personally the one that gets me every time. I hope you enjoy it. Early in my career, I and my men came across a Serbian armored personnel carrier with all its hatches open, submerged in a deep pond. After a mech crew fished it out of the water, it was found that all 10 of its crew were securely strapped in and showed no signs of struggling to get out, despite all the hatches being open. The crew had no bullet wounds, and they showed no sign of any kind of airborne poisoning or overt levels of carbon monoxide. These fuckers drowned. These guys could have gotten out so quick, some weren't even wearing seat belts. They just let themselves drown. What the hell? I started in 2010 in the Kosovo area. My missions have mostly been patrols to look for criminal or terrorist activity. My job has been very calm and there has been very little fighting. I mentioned in my last thread that I have 3 confirmed kills. Now that I am serving in Somalia, I perform searches of vessels, and protection runs of tankers, patrol escort fleets, or oil platforms. I killed 3 men during a 2010 firefight in Kosovo. These men had opened fire on my patrol, and that just doesn't fly. I do not regret killing them, because it was them or me. The 3 confirmed kills are those whose lives I ended with my M4. There are 2 others who are uncomforted kills simply because there had been many bullets in them, and it was impossible to tell which killed the man first. A lot of people make a huge deal about feeling all-powerful after killing someone. I just felt disappointed and kind of sad. The people I had to kill were illiterate farm boys not too far off from my age. To anyone wondering, the fight and the deaths I told were totally legal and all NATO policies were followed.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.